Why is everyone looking for them? The poor boy pointed calmly at the locked door. They go down there every day. The Buffett estate had never felt loud. It was the kind of house where voices softened on their own, where doors closed quietly, and children learned early not to interrupt important conversations. Nathaniel Buffett believed silence meant safety, that if the house was calm, then everything inside it must be fine. But that afternoon, his daughters were nowhere to be found. Staff searched room after room. Security checked hallways. Phones rang without answers, and still no panic. Because in houses like this, panic is always delayed. In the service corridor, near the laundry door no one ever used anymore, a small boy stood watching the adults rush past him. Elijah Thompson had seen this before. Not the shouting, not the searching, but the way Clara and Eloise always held hands, before disappearing down the same narrow hall, the way no one ever noticed. What Nathaniel didn't know yet was that his daughters hadn't run away. They hadn't been taken. They had gone back to the only place that still felt like their mother. And the smallest person in the house was the only one who understood why. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The Buffett estate stood like a magazine spread polished stone, spotless windows, the kind of curated perfection that made people assume everything inside was just as flawless. But inside, the air felt strangely empty, like it had been cleaned too thoroughly of emotion. There were no family photos on the walls, no messy shoes by the door, no toys in the living room, only quiet, the kind that didn't soothe, but unsettled. Clara and Eloise lived here, but nothing in the house seemed to belong to them. Over the past 18 months, 7 different nannies had walked those halls. All had come with credentials and glowing references. All had left without fanfare, resignation letters folded neatly, bags packed in silence. Behavior issues, they always said. The girls are difficult, but no one ever said exactly what that meant. The twins never spoke to strangers. They clung to each other like shadows, communicating through looks and half gestures, refusing to be separated for anything. If one cried, the other screamed. If one ran, the other followed. It was as if they shared a nervous system, and something inside it was constantly on alert. Outbursts came without warning, objects thrown, rooms locked, long stretches of unblinking silence followed by sudden panic. Each nanny had tried to impose structure, routines, boundaries. Each nanny had failed. Nathaniel Buffett, their father, rarely noticed. He was busy, distracted, always taking calls in the hallway, always explaining the girls' behavior away with phrases like, "It's just a phase," or, "They're still adjusting." But Kimberly Thompson, the newest hire, had seen something the others hadn't. She noticed that Clara and Eloise didn't just act withdrawn, they vanished. Every afternoon around the same time, they would quietly disappear from sight. Not to nap, not to read. They simply weren't there. At first, Kimberly assumed it was just part of the chaos of childcare. Children slipping between rooms, hiding beneath tables, curling up in closets. But it kept happening, and always, at exactly the same time. One day, she stood at the top of the stairs and watched the hallway clock. As the minute hand landed on the mark 2:07 p.m., silence, too quiet. The kind of quiet you don't notice until it arrives, like an absence you didn't expect to miss. She walked the halls, calling their names softly. Nothing. She checked their usual hiding places. Empty. The kitchen, the study, the playroom. Empty. 40 minutes passed. When she finally found them sitting on the floor of the linen closet, curled together like they were waiting out a storm, they looked up at her with wide, calm eyes. Not guilty. Not afraid. Just like they'd been trained. She sat down beside them on the carpet, her voice low. "What happens at this time of day?" Neither of them answered, but their eyes flickered toward the hallway, not the window. Not a sound, something unseen. And for the first time since arriving, Kimberly felt it. This wasn't behavior. It was a pattern, a ritual, a habit, learned in silence. Some children don't scream when something is wrong. They disappear quietly. If you've ever noticed the silence before the explanation, stay. The next day, she watched again. At 2:07 p.m., the house fell quiet, and the twins were gone. Kimberly notices the twins are missing for nearly 40 minutes each afternoon, and no one else has noticed. Whatever was happening here wasn't new. It had been going on long enough for even their pain to become part of the routine, and the routine was still happening. Elijah Thompson knew how to stay quiet. His mother called it being good, and he liked how proud she looked when she said it. After school, he would sit on the floor near the corner of the service kitchen while she folded laundry or prepped snacks for the girls upstairs. He didn't ask questions while she worked. He played with his toy car in slow circles across the tile. The adults didn't see him. Or maybe they forgot to. Either way, he heard everything. That was how he started noticing the twins. Clara and Eloise always walked the same way, close together, almost touching. They never ran. They never skipped. They just moved like they were tied to the same thought. When one turned her head, the other followed. When one blinked, the other squinted like she felt it. They were strange, but not mean. Once, Elijah smiled at them from the floor. Neither smiled back. But they didn't look away either. They just looked through him, like they were measuring something he couldn't see. He started watching them more after that. Not on purpose, just because he was small and still and curious. They held hands every time they left a room, even when no one was around, even when it was just to go down the hall. Always the same hand, always the same pace. One day, Elijah watched them pass the pantry door without saying a word. He peeked around the corner and saw them disappear into the rear corridor. Not the one the family used, the other one. The one with the laundry chute and the metal stairwell that echoed. He tilted his head. The next day, they did it again. Same time, same direction, same hand held. He waited until his mother walked by with a tray of folded towels. Then he whispered, "Where do they go?" She didn't stop walking. "They're probably with one of the other staff. They have their routines." She didn't ask why he wanted to know. So Elijah didn't ask again. He just kept watching. Sometimes they were gone for a long time. 30 minutes. Sometimes longer. Once, he counted all the way to 278 before he heard their steps again on the tile. What stood out most wasn't when they left, it was how they came back, because they were always different. When they returned, they looked quieter. Still, like their skin didn't fit quite right. Like they were full of something that made them float just a little above the floor. They never looked at anyone when they returned, not even each other. They walked side by side, but they didn't hold hands again until later. Elijah didn't have words for the feeling, but it made his stomach twist. He knew what mad looked like. He knew what sad looked like. This wasn't either. It was like they had been unplugged for a little while, like someone had turned the light off inside and then turned it back on too fast. Elijah notices the twins come back calmer than when they leave. He sat on the floor that afternoon with his car and didn't move it. He didn't tell his mom. He didn't ask more questions. But the next day, when the twins stood up and walked out of the room again, Elijah stood too, quietly, and followed. The lower levels of the Buffett estate didn't appear on any of the welcome tours. New staff were shown the main floor, the guest quarters, the outdoor pool schedule. But no one mentioned the basement, not even in passing. Kimberly had worked in large homes before, ones with pantries the size of apartments, hidden dumbwaiters, wine cellars older than the country. But this house felt different, not because of what it showed, but because of what it hid. It started with an offhand comment. A former housekeeper, visiting to drop off borrowed linens, lingered longer than necessary at the staff entrance. Her eyes drifted toward the service stairwell, then back to Kimberly. "That lower level was sealed years ago," she said quietly. "Before I arrived. No one ever told us why." She left before Kimberly could ask anything else. That same week, Kimberly overheard the twins speaking to the newest nanny, the fourth one since her arrival. Clara, in her usual whisper, had tilted her head and asked, "Can we go where Mommy used to take us?" The nanny blinked, caught off guard. "Where's that, sweetheart?" Neither girl answered. Instead, Eloise simply looked toward the far end of the corridor, toward the door with the metal stairs. Then they turned away, as if the conversation had never happened. The nanny didn't ask again. Kimberly stood just out of view, her hand frozen around a tray of folded towels. That question clung to her for days. Where Mommy used to take us. No one spoke about their mother. Not the staff. Not the girls. Not Nathaniel. Especially not Nathaniel. When asked about anything domestic, he defaulted to efficiency. The girls need more structure. Let's tighten their tutoring blocks. No more unsupervised time in the afternoons. It was always scheduling. Never listening. Never remembering. Kimberly saw it happening in real time, the way answers were replaced with control. The way grief was papered over with bullet points. She watched the twins shrink under routine. No longer resisting. No longer reacting. Just adapting. As if they understood that asking where Mommy went only made the clocks run tighter. One night, after the house had gone still, Kimberly sat in the laundry room, her fingers resting on a warm basket of towels she'd forgotten to fold. She thought about how many times she'd seen the girls disappear down that same corridor, always around the same time, always without alarm. She pulled out her phone and opened the staff schedule logs, casual documentation of naps, snacks, playtimes. She skimmed backwards, her heart tightening. The first time anyone had noted the girls going quiet in the afternoon, the same week their mother's name vanished from all conversation. Kimberly realizes the twins' disappearances started the same week their mother was removed from the home. No announcements had been made. No memorial. No farewell. Just removal. As if erasure was enough to resolve grief. But children don't erase. Children return to what made them feel held even when no one else remembers it. Kimberly stood, the towel basket still untouched. Whatever was downstairs wasn't just a sealed room. It was something remembered. By two children who had no words for absence, but knew exactly where to go when they missed the one person no one else would mention. And now they were going back. Every day. Nathaniel hadn't meant to open the old files. He had come into the office for a contract, something quick, something forgettable. But the incident reports were stacked at the back of the drawer, sealed in polite manila folders, their edges worn from shuffling, not reading. He almost passed them over. Almost. One had a sticky note still attached. A scribbled line in rushed handwriting. They become distressed when separated. He pulled another. Different nanny, different handwriting. Same sentence. The twins panic if you separate them, even for a moment. Another. Immediate distress when split up. They shut down. He sat down slowly, the folder sliding open in his lap. Report after report, all saying the same thing. Reworded, reshaped, but unchanging at the core. Clara and Eloise did not cope with separation. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of paper somehow heavier than the walls around him. And then, like a needle in the fabric of memory, a voice came back. Soft, worried, pleading. Please don't lock that door. His wife. He had barely remembered that conversation. A passing moment on a day filled with bigger things. Something about the service wing. The basement. I'll just have it sealed, he had said, not looking up. And she had said it again, more quietly. Please don't lock that door. He hadn't asked why. He hadn't listened. And now, all these months later, the girls were disappearing daily, and he had assumed it was covered. Assumed someone else was watching. Assumed order was enough. He rubbed his hands over his face, trying to force the memory further, to pull more from it. But nothing came. Just the tone of her voice, not angry, not dramatic, just afraid. For the first time since her absence, Nathaniel felt something crack. Not panic. Not yet. But something worse. Guilt. Not the kind you confess at dinner parties. The kind that rots in silence because you didn't know you were supposed to ask. This is the part where most people stop listening right before they realize how much damage silence can do. Stay. He stood and moved to the wall where the estate blueprints were framed in neat black glass. He tapped the bottom corner, the service level. No labels. No stairs. Just a blank. He had never asked. No one ever checked where the girls went. And now, every instinct screamed that he was too late to start. He opened the door to the hall, half expecting to hear footsteps, laughter, anything. But the house was silent, too silent. He thought of their eyes the way they always looked at each other, not at him. The way they never ran, never played, as if waiting for something to be taken away again. The father understands the truth before the girls are found. He sat back down, slowly, his heart beating with a weight he couldn't assign a name to, because now he saw it. The basement wasn't dangerous. It was just dismissed. Nathaniel realizes the basement was never dangerous. It was forgotten. And so were they. His daughters had returned, day after day, to the last place they remembered feeling close to her, to the space no one else would speak about. Not to hide, to remember, to return to what had been safe because no one had ever shown them what safety could become. Nathaniel closed the folder, hands shaking. The damage was already done. The house was too quiet for what was happening. Staff moved through the rooms in practiced silence, checking corners, closets, stairwells. No one raised their voice. No one dared to. Even in emergency, the Buffett estate kept its voice down. The twins hadn't been seen since mid-afternoon. It was now past dusk. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the main hallway, phone still in his hand. The call to security had been brief. The perimeter was being checked. Gates locked. Nothing looked disturbed. But something was wrong. He could feel it. Kimberly stood by the entryway, face pale, lips pressed into a tight line. She had retraced their steps 3 times. Pantry, sunroom, upstairs study. Nothing. No giggles. No whispered footsteps. No flickers of movement behind doors. Just gone. Nathaniel's voice was low when he spoke. They wouldn't run. Kimberly nodded. They don't. He walked down the hall. Slowly, hand brushing against the polished wall, the one with no family photos, no trace of memory. He passed the staff wing, looked toward the garden windows. Still nothing. Behind him, a small sound broke the quiet. Not a cry, not a command, just a voice. I know where they are. Nathaniel turned. Elijah stood near the base of the stairs, hands at his sides. Not afraid, not dramatic, just certain. Kimberly looked at him sharply. Elijah. He didn't blink, didn't stutter. He simply pointed toward the far corridor, toward the gate no one used, the one that led to the sealed stairs. And he said, clearly, your twins are in the basement. For a moment, the house itself seemed to freeze, not in fear but recognition, as if those words had been waiting for someone to say them out loud. Nathaniel's body moved before his mind could. He knelt, not with control, not with plan, but instinctively, like something sacred had just been revealed by something small. He looked Elijah in the eye, and for the first time, he saw it. This child had been watching. He had seen the hallway doors that stayed ajar, heard the quiet footfalls at the same time every day, seen the twins disappear, not by accident but into routine. Elijah hadn't known what it meant, but he noticed. More than any of the adults, more than the father whose job was to know. Truth comes from the smallest voice. Nathaniel stood slowly. No questions, no denial, just movement. He crossed the hall, pressed the code for the lower gate, and descended the steps that had once been locked at his request. Kimberly followed, not rushing, but ready. Sometimes God sends the truth in a voice we weren't listening for. Behind them, Elijah stayed where he was, still, unshaken, as if all along, he had only been waiting for someone to care what he'd seen. Downstairs, the hallway stretched forward, dim, untouched. At the far end, light spilled softly from beneath a door that hadn't been opened in years. Nathaniel reached for the handle. He didn't know what he'd find, only that it would change everything. The door opened with the soft sound of old air giving way. No creak, no groan. Just quiet, the kind that had settled in over years of being left alone. Nathaniel stepped inside first. The basement was cold, but not unbearable. Dim, but not dark. The air held no danger, only stillness. The room wasn't empty. Blankets had been folded into little nests along the walls, 2 of them, side by side. A flashlight lay on its side beside one. Crayon drawings covered the lower parts of the wall, simple lines, odd shapes, stick figures with too many arms, too few faces. Names were written backwards. Circles closed in on themselves. A stack of books, picture books, old and weathered, sat in a laundry bin. None had been touched recently, but all had clearly been read. Nothing about the room screamed. Nothing about it threatened. And yet, Nathaniel felt something shift inside him. Not fear. Not even shock. Something deeper. He crossed the room slowly, his footsteps muffled by the old rug someone had once laid out years ago. The corners had curled with time. A spill had stained the edge. In the far corner, two small shapes sat still, not hiding, not afraid. Clara and Eloise, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Just like always. They didn't cry. They didn't jump up. They didn't seem surprised to see him. They looked at him like children who already knew how long it would take someone to come looking. He knelt, and for a moment, he couldn't find a single word to say. Clara looked at her sister, then back at him. Her voice was soft. Is Mommy allowed to come back now? The words did not echo. They didn't need to. They landed like weight, not sound. Nathaniel didn't move. He looked around the room again, this time slower. There was a smell in the air, dust and fabric, the kind of scent that held memories no one had touched. One of the blankets still held a faint imprint of a name stitched into the corner. Her name. It had been a room once for play, for warmth, for whatever quiet thing their mother had offered them here. They had never forgotten it. They had never stopped returning. And no one had asked where they went. He hadn't asked. Not once. Kimberly stood in the doorway, silent. She didn't speak, didn't intrude. She only watched and knew, without being told, that what had been broken here could never be returned whole. The emotional cost becomes irreversible. Nathaniel's hands remained still in his lap. He couldn't say yes. He couldn't say no. He couldn't explain the silence, the removal, the forgetting. He could only look at them, at the two small lives that had taught themselves to disappear quietly, because staying seen hadn't brought them closer to safety. Clara rested her head on Eloise's shoulder. Eloise didn't move. They weren't afraid of being found. They were waiting to see if this time someone would stay. Nathaniel blinked against the sting behind his eyes. The truth wasn't that the girls had gone missing. It was that they had never left. Not really. They had just returned to the one place where love had once lived and waited for someone to remember where it was. The garden room was warm with afternoon light. For once, it didn't feel staged. The windows were open, and a breeze moved the linen curtains just enough to remind them that time hadn't stopped. Nathaniel sat in the chair closest to the window. Kimberly stood for a moment longer before quietly lowering herself onto the couch across from him. Her hands folded in her lap. No clipboard, no apron, just her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. It was Nathaniel who broke the silence. I should have known. Kimberly didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I did notice, she said finally, that they disappeared, that no one else seemed to ask where they went. He nodded slowly, once. Why didn't you bring it up? I thought. She hesitated. I thought someone in charge already knew, that it was part of something, scheduled. Nathaniel let that sink in, not in anger, not to make her flinch, just as something that had to be heard. I made it easy to think that, he said. I built a house where nobody questioned silence, not even when it looked like structure. Kimberly's voice was soft. You were grieving. That's not an excuse, he replied, without flinching. It's just the name for what I used to avoid doing the harder thing. What's that? He met her eyes. Being present. There was no dramatic pause, no raised voices, just two people sitting in the remnants of a system that had failed two children who never asked for anything but consistency and a place to be remembered. Kimberly sighed. Not to defend herself, but to release the weight of what hadn't been done. They never tried to tell me, she said. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe they stopped expecting anyone to listen. Nathaniel nodded again. He wasn't interested in assigning fault. He had lived too long assuming distance was protection. That silence meant strength. That grief was best processed by stepping away. But his daughters had grieved differently. They had stepped toward something, and no one had followed. Forgiveness begins without resolution. There's nothing I can say to undo it, Nathaniel said. I just want to make sure it's never allowed to happen again. Kimberly looked toward the window. her voice quiet. They don't need perfect, just present. Nathaniel stood slowly. Will you stay with them? She nodded without hesitation. He didn't thank her, not because he wasn't grateful, but because gratitude felt too small for what needed to be built now. As he turned to leave, Kimberly added one last thing. They still think she's coming back. Nathaniel paused in the doorway. I know. He didn't offer a correction, didn't explain the truth. Some conversations needed time, not information. Mercy doesn't erase the past, it changes what we do next. Outside, the garden trees swayed gently. The house was quiet again, but not with fear. This silence held something different now. Not forgetting, but beginning. Weeks passed, but the house didn't return to normal. It moved into something new, instead quieter, smaller, softer. Therapy began for Clara and Eloise. Carefully, privately, a woman came to the estate twice a week, someone who didn't ask for eye contact or answers. She just showed up, sat near, waited, and slowly, the twins began to do the same. The basement was never sealed again. No locks were placed on the service stairwell. The door remained open, and the blankets remained folded. Not as a sanctuary anymore, but as memory, as proof that their need for comfort had been real and that now they didn't have to hide to find it. The house changed, not with renovations, with people. There were fewer staff now. The routines were simpler. Meals happened at the same time. Walks in the garden were scheduled but flexible. Nothing rushed, nothing ignored. Structure didn't become stricter. It became kinder. Kimberly stayed. She didn't ask for a raise. She didn't demand recognition. She simply remained where she was already needed, in the quiet spaces, on the days no one remembered to say thank you. In the middle of routines that now felt more like presence than control, Elijah was no longer invisible. People greeted him when he came home from school. His name appeared on schedules. His questions were heard and answered. No one called him the helps kid anymore. He had never wanted to be the center, just counted, and now he was. Nathaniel changed too, but not in speeches or sudden awakenings. He didn't become the loud father. He didn't try to reclaim the space he'd left empty for so long with gifts or grand gestures. He sat, every morning, after breakfast, he sat with his daughters in the sunroom quietly. Some days they read. Some days they just sat and watched the leaves shift in the wind. He didn't ask them to open up. He let them close the distance themselves. And they did. Slowly, 1 inch at a time. The house began to sound different. Not louder, not livelier, just more honest, more alive in the places where stillness had once meant absence. Some stories don't ask for applause. They ask us to notice sooner next time. There was no ceremony, no moment when healing announced itself. But one afternoon, Clara reached for her father's hand while sitting beside him, and he didn't speak. He just held it. That was enough. Not every rescue comes with noise. Some only come with change. Later that evening, Elijah sat with Kimberly on the back steps of the garden. The sky was pink. The house lights were on. Inside, no one was shouting. No one was hiding. Are they okay now? Elijah asked. Kimberly didn't answer right away. They're becoming okay, she said. That's how it starts. The door stayed open behind them. The house, for the first time in a long time, felt like it had enough room for everyone inside it, even the silence.